This is Marc Bennett with the District Attorney's Office here in Sedgwick County. Speaking to the Crime Commission, I was asked to give sort of a current state of affairs with the DA's office and what's going on within the state, and also some of the things going on in the city. So we'll start off with something I was asked to speak about specifically, and that is the issue of speedy trial. So the right to a speedy trial is a constitutional right. You have a right to a public and speedy trial. And the courts are very familiar with that and how to supervise that and how to make sure that that right is protected. But in the state of Kansas and in certain states, we've gone a step further and added a statutory provision of speedy trial. It's in a specific statute. And for years, it was 90 days if you're in custody. You have 90 days from the date of your arraignment to get your trial started. A few years ago, they extended that to 250 days, and that's the current state of the law. So we've been fine with that for years, had very few problems. And then last March, like most of you, I was watching the events unfold with COVID. And I remember the night that the Big 12 tournament was canceled in basketball, I thought, okay, this is getting pretty serious. And I reached out to some legislative friends that next day and asked what the chances of getting a piece of legislation in front of them before they'd shut down for good. And we had about 4 or 5 days to get that done. And so Senate Bill 102 was passed, which in its first iteration said the Supreme Court would have the power to, Chief Justice of the Kansas Supreme Court would have the power to suspend deadlines, so statute of limitations, speedy trial, things like that, when the health or safety of the public, court staff, judges, attorneys, witnesses could be impacted. And it left it largely to her discretion, Justice Luker. During the course of the legislation, though, getting through the House, the legislation was changed, which said that her power to do that was going to be tied to the emergency declaration from the governor. And so when Governor Kelly passed her emergency declaration, when that ceased, then the Supreme Court's power to amend and suspend deadlines would cease. They gave it an extra 150 days, but that's essentially just a nod to speedy trial. So the concern I had was, and that by the way, that bill was passed, and then it was amended again in May on the last day of the session to say that it was going to sunset in September of this fall. I think the idea was we'll be well past COVID by then. Well, little did anyone know at that point in March and May that we still haven't had a jury trial. We've actually had one felony jury trial tried in Sedgwick County since March. And that becomes problematic. And so I wrote an email to the members of the Finance Council, because they were the ones who would have to approve an extension of the emergency order. And my concern to them that I expressed was, if you don't extend this, there's no way for us to get all these cases tried in 150 days. And to their credit, they took our concerns to heart. And a week ago, they allowed the governor to extend it. Now it's a 30-day extension, and they'll have to do it again. And the arrangement was that she would not try to shut businesses down again. So if you read all that in the paper, that's kind of the backstory. The issue we have here is, if we'd have had jury trials start up again after Memorial Day, that was the goal, at least what people were thinking. Then we'd have had 6-8 weeks to catch up, which we could have certainly done. But now that we've been off for 6 months, the backlog is just compounded. So let me give you a quick example. In Sedgwick County, we have 140 off-grid offenses alone right now awaiting trial. That's capital murder, first-degree premeditated murder, and Jessica's Law sex crimes committed against children. Just those 3 categories, nothing else. To try 140 jury trials, and we would hope that not all of them would go to trial. We'd be able to work some things out. But if we had to trial 140 of those, I would need about 7,000 jurors to try those cases. And you think, well, there's only 12 jurors in a case. Why do we need 7,000? Because you start with 50. We need 50 people to walk in the door, because I need 40 to 50 at least, because we need to have, number one, strikes for both sides. In an off-grid offense, both sides get 12 strikes. So that means we have to qualify 36. And in this time of COVID, we're going to qualify at least 2, if not 3, alternate jurors in case somebody gets sick. And so now you're talking about you have to impanel 45, 50 people to get down to that 12 plus 1 or 2 or 3 alternates. There is no way for us to get 7,000 people through this courthouse in the next 150 days, next 300 days for that matter. It's going to take a good long time for us to work this down. So that was my concern, and that's the situation we're in right now. We have started jury trials, as I said. This last week we issued, the court system does it, the DA's office isn't in charge of this. They issue the summons for the jurors. They issued a summons for 120 folks, and I believe 29 showed up. So it's also another thing is we're going to have to figure out what it's like to get people to show up in the time of COVID. Who's going to want to come to the courthouse and walk through the doors every day and sit next to somebody in a jury box? The week before that, they issued over 100 summons, and 4 people showed up. That was not enough for a jury trial. So it's a new world we're trying to figure out and maneuver our way through while still affording people the best we can, try to afford their constitutional rights to speedy trial, and also a jury by their peers. But at the same time, keeping the public safe, not only from COVID and exposure at the courthouse, but also public safety in terms of the criminal justice system. So interesting time to be an elected district attorney in this jurisdiction or anywhere in the United States for that matter. And speaking of, the nice segue here to interesting times to be in the arena of criminal justice, there's also the issue of criminal justice reform. And the George Floyd situation in Minneapolis last spring, sort of a powder keg nationally and to some extent internationally. So before that, though, the governor had asked and the legislature had put together a criminal justice reform commission in Topeka. It went into effect in 2019, so 9 months before anybody had heard of the situation in Minneapolis. And that was fortuitous. It was good. I'm glad they did that because our commission's been up and running now long enough that we've gotten quite a bit of work done. When I got to Topeka as a member, I was the conferee for the DA's Association statewide, and I pointed out that we had done this before. Kansas actually has a fairly long history of criminal justice reform, dating back to about 2000. We've done several things. Actually, go back to 93 with the grid system. There's been a lot of efforts at reform. I'll walk you through a couple of them, but the bottom line is we've tried to make it harder to revoke people on their probation for technical violations. We've tried to add money for people to get into drug treatment, and we've done any other number of other things to make probation violations harder to send somebody to the penitentiary for. So we've done all that for 20 years, but our prison population still is just ticking up. We were at roughly 10,000 people in the in the prison system in Kansas when COVID started. So what we did, so I mentioned that first meeting, I mentioned that we'd done this several times, and if we weren't going to be serious about trying to make some lasting change, and what I meant by that, what I said explicitly was if the legislature's not going to take this seriously, I got better things to do than schlep back to Topeka once a month for the next 2 years. At which point they looked at me and said, how about you be chair? So there you go, I'm the chair of this commission. Which was fine. And we set up several subcommittees, and I'll give you a sense of what's going on in the state now in terms of criminal justice reform. So we've got the reentry subcommittee, meaning people coming out of the penitentiary, they're coming back to the community, reentering society. What could we do to make that a more successful transition? So a few things that have been discussed, some of which were submitted as legislative proposals before this last session. Nothing much got done because COVID shut it down. I think only 3 or 4 bills got passed at all this year. But it wasn't. I don't think it was a reflection of a lack of interest from the legislature. To their credit, I think they were receptive, but COVID, put a monkey wrench in everybody's plans. But some of the reentry programs that have been discussed: traffic fees and fines. If you get traffic fees, you get pulled over for a traffic ticket, and you have driving on a suspended, speeding, and no seatbelt. All right. You're supposed to get in and pay those things, and if you don't, your license can be suspended. So in my example, I've already presupposed a driving while suspended, but let's say you just got a speeding ticket, but you didn't pay it because you didn't have the money. And so you don't come down to the courthouse, you don't show up, you just blow it off. Well, at some point, the Department of Revenue is going to suspend your license. So then you get picked up again. Now it's the second time. Now it is the driving on a suspended and another speeding ticket. And if you have a suspended license, odds are you're probably not going to go out and get insurance on your car. Insurance isn't going to insure somebody without a license. So now maybe you have an insurance ticket as well. So now you've got the first set of tickets, the second one, and you want to pay them. The fees go for every one of these. And then if you want to get your ticket reinstated, or your license reinstated rather, you have to pay a reinstatement fee. And the current state of the law is you have to pay it for each count, which frankly is a little heavy-handed. And so that was one thing we talked about, is reducing the fees and fines. Make it possible for people to get their licenses back, because we live in a state without widespread public transportation. We have access to some buses in Wichita, but that's about it. And if you really want somebody to be a productive citizen, pay their fines, pay their taxes, send their kids to school, keep a steady job. They're going to have a way to get there, and so let's make it less onerous on them for fees and fines on traffic offenses. It seems like a pretty minuscule thing, but it really adds up. People can end up owing thousands of dollars and never get their licenses back. The ability to consolidate for supervision. So you could be on probation in the city for a domestic violence interaction. You could be on probation in the county with county community corrections for a felony theft. And you might also be on parole for the thing you went to prison for 5 or 6 years ago. Seeing essentially three POs, three supervision officers. And is there some that seems like, again, redundant, a waste of resources, very inefficient? Is there a way to consolidate those supervision costs and supervision responsibilities? Proportionality, pardon me, is another subcommittee. We're talking about the drug grid primarily. And as the drug grid, we have a grid system in Kansas. It's based upon the severity level of the crime and your criminal history. Should we amend the drug grid? Is it too severe? Is it not severe enough? Should it be modified? Registration of offender violations. You can get a charge with a crime if you were supposed to register as a violent offender or a drug offender or a sex offender, and you don't. If you don't tell the sheriff where you're living, that's a new charge. I think there's not a lot of temperature, a lot of appetite for amending the sex offender violators, but people who are an offender because they sold drugs, I think there's a question that people are asking is, do we really need an offender registry for that? And even the violent offenders, where's that line? Where does it become a matter of public interest, and where is it just onerous on the individual? So these are part of the discussion. The Diversion Specialty Courts Specialty Prison Subcommittee is talking about things like specialty prisons for the elderly, meaning there's people who go in and do 50 years in the penitentiary. By the time they get done, they're in their 60s, 70s, 80s. Should they be housed in the same location as younger people? People with mental health issues and drug abuse issues, should we have specific beds set aside for them? The Department of Corrections has identified a plan to do just that, but the money's got to be there from the legislature, and right now, after COVID, the money's going to be scarce for this next session. The diversion bill was something I personally submitted 2 years ago. It got some traction, but they wanted to put it over to this committee, this reform commission. It passed the House last year, 125 to nothing, and so I had expectations it would be successfully reviewed in the Senate, but literally the week I was supposed to go up and present it to the Senate, they shut down because of COVID. So I think it'll get passed this year, but it's a situation we're trying to enhance the availability of diversion. So if you're charged with a crime, we can divert you away from that felony or that misdemeanor and put you on diversion if you complete think of it as probation before the conviction. And the problem in Kansas is diversion is supervised by DA's offices. And so when there's 85 to 90 county attorney's offices in the state out of 105 counties that are one-man, one-woman operations, they don't have time to supervise anything. They're just running to court handling the traffic offense, the child needed care offense, the juvenile offender cases, and the criminal cases. And most of them are part-time jobs. And so there's very little set aside for a diversion supervision. So why don't we have probation officers supervise these folks? They're going to get them anyway if they're not diverted. They're going to be convicted, so why don't we do that? There's another component, Senate bill money, meaning going back to 2000, 2001, there was a Senate bill called Senate Bill 123, which set aside money for people to have access to pay for their drug treatment. Great idea. The problem is you can only get it if you've been convicted. So once you've been convicted, now there's housing issues. You lose your Section 8 housing. Certain jobs you can't get. There's certain certifications, hairdresser, bartender, other things. You can't do those jobs if you're a convicted felon. So the discussion was, why don't we put that money up front in diversion, try to keep people out of that situation, pay their debt to society, pay the restitution to victims, get the drug treatment they need, all those sorts of things, have access to this money, but not tie it to a criminal conviction for a felony. That's one of the bills. We also talked about specialty courts and trying to expand the use of those. You've heard of veterans courts, drug courts, things like that. Then the other question is pre or post conviction. Do you get into that program only after you've been convicted, or is that something you can do pre-conviction? It's part of the discussion. Lots of other things. The other subcommittee that's just started up this spring and summer was the race in the criminal justice system subcommittee. I'm the chair of that right at the moment. And some of the things we've discussed is the access to public defenders. Should we have wider access to public defenders around the state? Not every community has a public defender system. In a lot of smaller communities, they have just private lawyers who do that work on a commission. But as you talk to the rural prosecutors and rural judges, they'll say, Smith County, that prosecutor up there is on our committee, and she says, we don't have a public defender. If we need somebody to do felonies, they have to drive from Salina, over an hour away. So they're not going to be available that evening to go talk about bail and that sort of thing with the judge. So that's something we need to work on. So bail reform is also a big topic of discussion. Should there be lower bail? Should there be either no bail? The feds do it in a situation where it's usually bail or no bail. Either they let you out or they don't. It doesn't mean it's more like you stay in custody or you're OR'd out. Should there be cash bail? It's kind of a philosophical question right now, but it's one that's very much on the minds. It's a national discussion and one going on in Kansas as well. So those are the big topic issues in a nutshell. I'm kind of going through this fast, but trying to keep it to a reasonable amount of time. Give you a couple other stats from both the city and the state, and then I'll give you some final thoughts here. But some stats you need to know about. Property crimes are down right now in Sedgwick County, and frankly, as I see most of the country, the property crimes are down, which is good. Unfortunately, certain violent crimes are up, not only in Wichita but also in most major American cities. Rapes up, not a double digits, but up. But the one that's most concerning is the two that are most concerning: drive-bys. They're up exponentially right now in Wichita, and homicide is up 50+% over this time last year. We're already exceeded. I'm sitting here today on September 21st, I believe, and we have as many homicides as we did all of last year. And last year was a big year compared to the year before. Over the last 8 years, since 2013, we're up. We had 17 homicides that year, and last year we had 40. And this year we're already over 40. So homicides are way up. And what we're seeing a lot of is there's a lot of DV. A lot of it's methamphetamine related. But another huge portion is just acts of violence between individuals, gangs. A lot of drug and gun buys gone bad. People are exchanging guns and then robbing each other during the exchange of the guns. So these are difficult trends to get a hold of. But one other thing that's important as we go forward, both in the city but also in the state, trying to decide how we're going to spend our money when it comes to reform and when it comes to the criminal justice system. Drugs are up a ton over the last 10 years. Drug convictions. And people say, well, quit worrying about all these nonviolent drug offenders. We're not talking about marijuana cases. They've almost been eliminated from the prison system. It's methamphetamine and heroin and things like that. And it's tough to just ignore somebody who's dealing or using methamphetamine because that's such a triggering mechanism for other types of crime. That being said, sending people to prison for 6 months, 9 months, a year, just to come right back out no better than they were without any real aggressive treatment being offered to them is just delaying the inevitable. And they just churn through the system, chewing up costs, taking up time. And so that's the final thing I was going to share with you is just some final thoughts. Mental health treatment, drug abuse treatment. These are things that we do not have in Kansas to the extent we need it. If you have insurance, if you have a provider, then you've got better access. But if you don't, and these folks all do not have health insurance, the ability to get into treatment for mental health issues, for drug substance abuse issues, goes way down. And the few beds that are available, they'll be available to you, but maybe it's 90 days, 120 days before a bed's free. If a guy's ready to get in tonight because he's finally kind of hit rock bottom, and we'll tell him, we'll see you. It's September. We'll see you in January. Give me a break. He'll be arrested 15 times between now and then. So we're going to have to figure out what we do about that. The final thought has to do with it's all part of this same discussion, but race. people have asked, is there, how do we eliminate systemic racism? And I would tell you that, in my opinion, we've done a lot to try to do that years ago. The grid system is supposed to be, essentially take race and gender and everything else out of this. It's simple. What was the level of the crime you committed, and what's your criminal history? And those are the only two relevant factors. But I wonder, upon reflection, if we have ignored the role that some of these factors have. So let me give me an example. Poverty is so woven into any discussion about race. Let me give you two examples. You have two young guys that are both arrested and convicted for the same crime, possession of methamphetamine. Never been in trouble before, so it's a level 5 offense. They're not going to jail. They got probation. They're going to have multiple chances at probation. There's lots of probation conditions that people are asked to comply with, but the main ones are pretty simple. Get a job, have stable housing, obey the laws, have clean UAs, urinalysis tests, don't be using drugs and alcohol, complete whatever treatment you've been told to do, don't associate with felons, and if you have an education, if you don't have one, get your GED. Everything else sort of circles around those things. So if you are a young kid who has parents in your life, maybe a white kid, and you have means, maybe your mother is in a position at her job where she can take off in an afternoon and get you to treatment and take you to see your PO. And there's nobody, you don't have anybody in your nuclear family with a felony conviction in their record. So staying away from felons shouldn't be an issue for you. Okay, that kid is very likely to be successful on probation. You have another kid who's grown up in poverty. Maybe he doesn't have a two-parent home. The parent that is there is working multiple jobs, does not have the ability to take off and take this kid to probation, to treatment providers, to get his GED classes. In terms of an employment, this kid's ability to get to his or her job is going to be difficult if they don't have a decent set of wheels. And if the single parent that they live with has got the only set of wheels and they're trying to borrow that, you can see how this can compound over time. And so, I think we have ignored those things over time, saying, look, everybody's expected to toe the same line. But the question that's starting to be asked is that realistic? Do we need to invest more, both in terms of resources, but in a larger sense? There's a discussion nationally about housing, about health care. I'm not advocating one side or the other, but it's a conversation that needs to take place. So these are complicated issues. It's a complicated time, but we're here in Wichita at the forefront of this conversation, and this office is very much involved in this. As the chair of the Criminal Justice Reform Commission for the state of Kansas, I get to be a part of this every day. As the chair of the Race and the Criminal Justice Reform Subcommittee, I'm involved in these discussions, and running the largest DA's office in the state. I have to have these conversations with the judges and the defense bar and probation and supervision and those folks, so we can try to make sure we're running as efficiently as we can and doing the most good as possible. The big picture is we want people to stay out of the prison system. We want them not to victimize their fellow citizens. We want people to pay their taxes, get to their jobs, and live their lives, and be able to do so free from victimization of crime, whether it's property crime or violent crime. But over the next several years, this state, this city, this nation is going to have to have a little soul searching on how we're going to spend our resources and how we're going to attend to some of these issues. So, difficult time, but I think we're up to the challenge, and I hope we'll come out on better for all the effort in the long run. So, thank you for your time. I wish I was there with you so I could answer questions. But if you have any, reach out. My email's Marc.Bennett@Sedgwick.gov. That's Marc.Bennett, Bennett @Sedgwick, the county, .gov as in government. Shoot me a question if you have one, and I'll do my best to get back with you. Thank you all for your time.